The following program is brought to you in living color on NBC.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're here at the colorful studios of KALW San Francisco.
Continuing conversations that began at Philosopher's Corner at Stanford, where Ken and I profess philosophy.
Today, it's Seeing Red, the metaphysics of color.
Is color in the eye of the beholder, or is color objectively real? Would colors still exist in the world even if no one was around to see them?
Well, John, I think the answer to this is kind of obvious, because think of all the different animals and the differences in how they see color. Some don't see color at all. Some see just a few colors. Others see lots of colors. Monkeys, for example, see red, but they see it quite poorly. Birds and bees see colors way up into the ultraviolet range. Other animals see colors way down into the infrared range. Humans are blind to both of those extremes. So, of course, isn't it obvious? Color is obviously in the eye of the beholder.
Not so fast, Ken. I mean, I grant you the beholder needs eyes, and different animals are capable of seeing different colors. But all of that doesn't imply that color is merely in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, but ask yourself the next question. Which of these animals see the world's true colors?
Well, I think all of them do. The world is awash in all sorts of colors. It's no surprise that different animals have evolved to see different parts of the total color spectrum.
Yeah, but there's more than that going on, John, because different observers can see different colors given the very same light as inputs. Not because of any difference in what's out there in the world, but solely because of differences in their visual systems, ergo colors in the eye of the beholder.
So, your argument, you think that because perceived color is relative, then actual color isn't objectively real.
Well, actually, it's more than that, because I think I reject the very distinction you just made between perceived color and actual color. Color is just perceived color.
Ken, you're just confused. You're thinking of color like pain. Now, perceived pain is just pain, no distinction. When a needle pricks my skin and hurts me, the pain is obviously totally subjective. It's caused by something in the world, but doesn't belong to something in the world. It would make no sense to ask, would the pain still be in the needle if no one was around to be pricked by it?
Yeah, that's right, except now there's this thing. I am thinking of it like pain, except there is this difference. For some strange reason, which I can't figure out, with color, we have this persistent illusion that it is objectively out there, splattered all over the surfaces of things, but it's just an illusion.
But, Ken, you have to admit that unlike pain, color certainly appears to be splattered all over. There's a difference. Why not take the appearance at face value?
Well, I'll give you a proof, an argument. I'm going to perform a little thought experiment to make my point. Let's have two people run some water, say, over their hands, and then they're going to stick their hands into a pot of water at a fixed temperature, say 70 degrees.
Oh, wait a minute. So you're losing the argument about color, and so now we're going to talk about water and temperature?
No, John. I'm exploiting an analogy. I promise you on all that's holy. It's going to help me prove how wrong you are about color. But you have to bear with me for just a second, please.
All right.
Okay,
continue.
So we got a pot of water at 70 degrees. Now, let's have the first person run cold water at 35 degrees, say, over her hand. And let's have the second person run hot water at, say, 100 degrees over her hand. Now, what do you think is going to happen when they both stick their hands back into the water? What do you think they're going to experience?
Well, that's pretty obvious, Ken. The one who's been running cold water over their hand, when they stick it into lukewarm water in the pot, is going to experience that water not as lukewarm, but as hot. And the one who's been running hot water is going to experience the lukewarm water as really cool.
Right, and that's even though the water has a fixed temperature. Now, why is that? That's because, John, the perceived coolness or hotness of the water, it's totally in the hand of the observer. Sure, we have this propensity to project the coolness or hotness onto the water itself, but it's not really there. And I think it's the same with color. Color is totally in the eye of the beholder too, but just like with coldness or hotness, we mistakenly project it out into the world.
But your own argument itself turns on a distinction between the subjective perception of coolness or hotness and its objective correlate, temperature. So aren't you making my point for me? You are saying that we need to distinguish perceived color, which can vary, depending on the state of the observer, from objective color, which is like temperature, fixed independently of the observer.
No, color is totally different from temperature. There is no objective correlate. There is a cause out there, but it's not the objective correlate. All there is to being red, John, is looking red. It makes no sense whatsoever to say that something objectively red looks differently to different observers. Makes no sense.
Not true. A red surface illuminated by yellow light looks black, but it's still red.
But that's just because we arbitrarily stipulate that the color something really is the color it looks under white light. But that's just a convention. It's just a trick of language. That's not going to get color objective.
Well, I see it's not going to be easy for me to talk you out of your radical color skepticism.
Or for me to talk you out of your naive color realism.
So let's call a temporary ceasefire and hear a report from our roving philosophical reporter, Caitlin Esch. We asked her to go out and explore the neuroscience of color perception, and she files this report.
What is color?
Color is a form of expression.
Color is an innate visual language and a unique experience to all of us.
Color is tied to the observer in that without eyes and brains, does color exist?
Color is a mental experience.
Steve Chevelle is a professor at the University of Chicago where he studies color vision.
Color is not in light. Color is not in objects. Color is in our mental representations of how we bring in the outside world.
Chevelle says a lot of what we know about color comes from studying those who don't see color normally.
About 8% of men don't see the same colors as nearly all women and the other 92% of men.
They're actually missing something in the eye that sends color information along to the brain. See, color perception is a complex interaction between the environment, the eye, and the brain. It's also an experience that depends a lot on context.
So if you take a white shirt and view it under sunlight on a bright sunny day, everyone would agree it looks bright white.
But if you go inside to a living room with a typical tungsten screw-in light bulb, the wavelengths coming off that shirt would make it look orange-yellow.
Of course, we don't see orangish yellow, and that's because the brain is recalculating, recomputing what the environment is and taking that into account so that we experience a color of an object that's constant.
Basically, every single artist who works in color is struggling with how it is that the brain represents color.
Bevel Conway is an artist and visual neuroscientist at Wellesley College. He says to understand how color works in context, look at novice art students. They have no trouble painting the contour of an apple, and they can color match or mix red paint to match the apple.
But what the artists or the novices find very difficult, and in fact experienced artists find very difficult as well, is how to then get that apple to look right in context.
A red apple may look right on a blank white canvas, but
when they get around to thinking about what they're going to do in the background, they put these colors almost randomly in the background, and those colors completely change the appearance of the apple to the point where, the student doesn't like what they've done anymore.
There are optical illusions that mimic this experience. A line might look light pink or dull orange depending on the colors surrounding it, when in fact they're the exact same color. Great artists like Matisse figured out a way around this phenomenon.
Essentially what he does is he leaves bits of the canvas blank between his painted marks. And what that enables him to do is to protect the colored marks against chromatic induction.
Chromatic induction, of course, is when colors change based on the colors around them. Claude Monet was also an expert in color. His impressionistic paintings capture white by mixing a variety of colors.
How is it that he manages to get, the white of a woman's dress to look like a cohesive item of clothing, yet comprised of mottled patches of blue and pink and green and so on?
Conway says when an artist paints a landscape, she's working backwards to unravel the way our brains perceive color and make us feel like we're looking at the real thing. For Philosophy Talk, I'm Caitlin Esch.
Thanks, Caitlin, for that fascinating excursion into the world of color and neurosciences. I'm John Perry. I'm sitting here chromatically inducing the beautiful colors of the KALW studio with my fellow Stanford philosopher, Ken Taylor.
And today we're discussing the metaphysics of color. We're joined now by Jonathan Cohen. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of California, San Diego. He's author of The Red and the Real, an essay on color ontology. Jonathan, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thanks for having me. It's really great to be here.
So, Jonathan, what first made you want to spend so much time thinking about color? I mean, is there some kind of traumatic color experience in your past? And especially, why the philosophy of color?
Well, I guess color is an extremely salient aspect of our experience. Nobody can help notice it. It's really visually fascinating. Of course, as a kid, I had all the same sort of inverted spectrum questions that many children come to independently. But then one thing that made me think this was a real area for intellectual investigation was to realize, wait a second, there's some really cool science about color that really constrains the options. So I have in mind, for example, the kind of stuff that Steve Chevelle mentioned at the head about color contrast and induction and stuff. And I thought, wow, that's really cool stuff. And I want to get my hands dirty with this. It also turns out to interact a lot with all kinds of areas of philosophy. So what better for a philosopher to do? Okay, so before we end this opening segment, I want you to do two things. First, explain inverted spectrum, what you mean by that, because not all of our radio listeners grew up obsessing about that. And second, why don't you just quickly settle this debate that Ken and I were having about whether colors are real or just in the mind. So, shoot. No problem. Okay, inverted spectra is the idea that there can be differences in phenomenal experience holding something else fixed. So you get one stimulus, maybe a green light or something, and you and I see it, but maybe our phenomenal experience is different. And then what do you hold fixed across that difference? Can be a lot of different stuff. So some people think all the behavioral evidence is fixed. So there's no way behaviorally to distinguish which one of us, to distinguish the fact that our phenomenal experience is different, for example. So lots of kids come to that independently.
So the idea is, my favorite color is blue and yours is red, but actually maybe when I see what I call blue is really the experience you have when you see red, and that explains why we really both have the same color experience as our favorite.
Yeah, but I want you to settle this, okay? I said a naive color realist. He really thinks they're out there. I think they're just projections. Who's right, me or my esteemed colleague over there?
Or John.
Ken, I'm afraid I'm taking your side on this against John. So here's a challenge for John. So actually, Ken tried to raise something like this challenge himself. So think about a case where you got one light and different observers say that it's different. It looks different. It's telling their experiences are telling them different things about the way the world is. One observer says, as it might be, that it's green without looking bluish, and the other one says, well, it's both greenish and bluish. So that can certainly happen. So who's right? Looks like John is committed to saying that at most one of those observers is right, but what could possibly choose between the observers?
Well, the question isn't which observer is right. The question is, does the whole idea of our color experience evolving make sense if there's not something out there in the real world that affects our chances for survival that we're learning about? So, even if our experiences differ, even if spectras are inverted, that's no more surprising that they're different languages for the same thing, is it? There's something out there that we're talking about. There's something out there that's causing our color sensations.
So there's a lot to talk about here, and we're going to have to dig into this. This is a big, deep, hard, fascinating topic. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're asking about the nature of color with Jonathan Cohen from UC San Diego.
Where in the world is color? Locked up in the mind of the perceiver or splattered all over the surfaces of things? Is it possible for you and I to perceive the same color if the way it looks to you is totally different from the way it looks to me? Or does the look of a color constitute its essence?
Color, its perception, and its reality. Plus your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
Mr. Rainbow himself, Roy G. Biv. But are all those colors really out there in the rainbow or anywhere? I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. We're asking about the metaphysics of color. Is color out there in the objective world, or is it a mere projection and or illusion? That's the kind of question we're gripped with today.
Our guest is Jonathan Cohen from the University of California at San Diego.
So, Jonathan, I appreciate your agreeing with me over John, but I've been reading your book, and I don't think you really agree with me. I have a simple-minded view. You have a much more sophisticated view. But it does seem to me that your view wants to have it both ways. There's something like objective, right? Color's in some sense objective, but it's also some sense subjective because it's what you call response-dependent. You seem like you want to have it both ways. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess I do want to have it both ways. I think there's an object, there's a subject, so there's something objective that's in the object. The way that object and the way it is interacts with the subject is a relation, and I guess I don't see any conflict in saying that amongst the things that are objectively true about the world are the relations that objects have with subjects.
So let me try and do some laying out of the landscape. So John at least was pretending, I hope he was pretending, that colors are really splattered over objects out there. There's something objective. I said it's purely subjective. It's like the pain caused by the needle. There's something objective that causes the pain, but it's not the correlate of my pain. The pain's totally in me. You seem to be kind of in between us. I think, yeah, there's something out there that causes the color sensations. Different color sensations may be given the same thing, but the color really is that thing that causes the color sensation. Why say that? Why think that when we don't think that the thing that causes the pain sensation is the objective correlate of pain?
Well, I guess one question is what you think the pain is. Another question is what causal roles do you want the pain to play? So in the case of color, I don't think there's any problem in saying that colors cause color experiences. The objective properties of objects cause things happening in subjects. That doesn't by itself settle the question, though, of where the color is, because if the color is a relation, then it's the relational thing that does the causation.
Well, but wait a minute. You just contradicted yourself with all due respect. You said we can certainly say that colors cause color sensations. And then you refined it to the objective properties of things cause color sensations. Well, it sounds like you put those two things together. You got colors are the objective properties of things, so you agree with me and not Ken.
That doesn't sound right to me. So
tell John why he's so wrong. I do this all the time, so it's your turn to tell him why he's so wrong.
So do you think that the needle is causing the pain experience, or do you think that the pain is causing the pain experience?
Well, I think the needle is causing the pain experience, and I think the color is causing the color experience. Now, the needle does have a property that we recognize in English called painfulness, or being painful to the touch, or being painful when it interacts with you. So we do use the word pain for both the property in the needle and for the property, the sensation it causes in us. So isn't this insistence about it, colors in the mind or in the object, isn't it just really not recognizing the flexibility of our words? We can use the same word for the objective property and for the sensation.
It seems to me that I want to say exactly the same thing about red that you just said about pain. So we say that the needle has this property of causing sensations, and we also think that the red object, as it might be a coffee cup, has the disposition to cause sensations in observers. And we also think that we can perhaps by extension, use the word red to pick out that particular sensation that gets caused, just as we can use pain to talk about the sensation that gets caused.
Well, there's a structural analogy because both are involved. Both are cases of perception. But notice that in the case of pain, the important thing you're finding out about is about your own body, that it's in a situation that can do damage. Whereas in the case of color, there is a correlation between whatever the cause of color sensations is in objects. Not a perfect correlation, but we can judge the edibility of an apple by the color it is, or the color sensation it causes in us, if you want to put it that way. And so pain and color aren't exactly the same, because color is much more informative about projectable properties of things in the world.
No, wait a minute. I want to get in here because I think I learned this from your book, but I think I've read it other places too, so maybe I read it. Like, take brown, right? If you look at brown kind of by screening out all the surrounding context, It goes away. There are no brown things.
You get a very old governor. Is what you get.
There are no. I mean, is this right? Is this right, Donna? There are no brown things. Brown is a color that we construct only in a context of brown. Screen out the context. These things look like orangish or something like that. Am I getting this right?
That's
Roughly?
exactly right. So if you screen off the surround, then brown things look either yellow or orangish. So it's what we call an essentially contrast color.
Doesn't that show that, we construct these color experiences, but the brain does some complicated stuff to construct the color experiences, but what color it constructs is not completely determined at all by, what's out there in the world. It's not like a thermometer measuring objective properties of the world, because some things, a very brown thing that will look brown in certain circumstances without changing the light coming from that surface will not look brown. So the brain's doing some funny stuff.
Well, yeah, but look at your example about temperature, right? Temperature is an objective property, and it's what we detect by sticking our hands in things, although the reactions it causes in us are not as systematic and context independent as a thermometer would be. Isn't the analogy with color and temperature perfect?
What do you think, Jonathan?
I think that's exactly the issue. Is the analogy any good? So there are some properties like temperature where we do think that there's the objective thing out there, and if a representation in our heads tells us that the objective thing isn't out there, well, we're wrong. But then there are other properties where that's just the wrong analogy. So think about the property of being funny, for example. Suppose I have a joke and John thinks it's funny and Ken thinks it's not funny.
Then John will steal it.
Yes, right.
Yeah, I think he will.
Keep going.
It seems to me that that's a case where we don't want to say that the analogy is right. We do not want to say that, there's a fact of the matter. What's out there is if Ken, it either is or isn't funny, and if Ken misses that fact, he's missing something out there in the world. So that's quite different from the temperature analogy. And now the question is, where do you want to locate red? You can't simply point to the existence of the temperature case and say, oh, well, that determines matters for us.
Well, I agree. I don't think colors are quite like pain on the one hand. So on the other hand, they're not quite like temperature either. But tell me this: there have been attempts to identify. We know what temperature is in a sense. It's mean molecular energy or something like that. And you might think colors was just the wavelengths bounced off, but that turns out to be wrong. Then there's more sophisticated things like reflectance, which is somehow the ratio of the wavelengths bounced off and the wavelengths bounced off by other things. Is there a good theory of what the objective correlate of color vision, whether we call it color or not, is?
The best theory of that kind is the kind of theory that you just mentioned. So it says that colors are identical to classes of reflectance properties. Reflectances are, as you say, the ratio of reflected light to incident light. So something reflects, let's say, at a wavelength lambda, it reflects 90% of the incident light. So you can just go across the visible spectrum and get a curve for each surface. And then if you think of colors as being classes of those curves, that's the best such theory that I know about.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about the metaphysics of color. We've got Anthony from San Francisco on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Anthony.
Good morning. You just started to touch on my question, which is, we can measure the wavelength and frequency of light, and we can come up with a spectrum of whatever we're seeing, and we know that there's such a strength of 680 nanometer light and such a flux of 810 nanometer light and so on. We can come up with a spectrum for what we're seeing. And it seems to me that that's objective. That's something that we can measure and all objectively agree on. And I wonder how that relates to this discussion of color perception.
Thanks for the question, Anthony. What do you think, Jonathan?
So exactly, there is that objective property. You can measure it. It's true. That doesn't answer the question whether that thing that's objective that you measured is the color. Let me give you an analogy with the joke case. I tell a joke. There are objective syntactic properties of the string that I utter. There are objective semantic properties of the string that I utter. But you might not think that the funniness of the joke is identical to any one of those objective semantic or syntactic properties. So just because you can measure the objective properties doesn't mean that you want to identify color with the thing that you measured.
And Jonathan, let me add, again, this is something I retaught myself through reading your very fine book, The Red and the Real, an essay on the color ontology. But there are all these color illusions and all this really cool science. I mean, you put the same, as it were, objective thing in a different, surrounded by a different context, and the color discriminations will change. I mean, things that look the same color when they're both in background 1, when you put one in background 1 and the other one in background 2, they'll look different colors all of a sudden. And you can really, really play with this. So it doesn't seem to me obvious that there's some clear mapping between here's an objective property out there and here's the color that so-and-so will perceive. I mean, what do you think about that kind of phenomenon?
So the objective properties, when you place the patch against background 1 and background 2, are being held fixed. And as you say, you can really dramatically affect the way things look. Now, John can say that one of those appearances really misrepresents the way the world is, but I think that that's, in general, a very hard thing to defend. It's hard to come up with a non-arbitrary way of choosing, this is the background that, to the exclusion of all others, reveals the true way that the world is. Yeah, that's a real challenge for that kind of view.
But I think that you're putting a big burden on colors that turn out to be objective properties. I mean, what we evolved for was not to identify context-free, non-situated properties of things. What we evolved for is to find out what Mackey calls the Inus conditions. That is, to put it, the last thing necessary, given pretty normal situations, for something important to be true. So our colors do that. In good light, in a normal situation, we can detect the difference between a red apple and a green apple, and thereby make a distinction between ones that are ready to eat and ones that aren't ready to eat.
Sorry, John, I just don't.
So why do we have to have a way of detecting these properties that works in any context? We don't have that with size or shape or anything else.
What do you say, Jonathan? I hear you chomping at the bit there.
Sorry, I just don't think that the appeal to normal conditions, evolutionarily salient conditions, is going to help because there's a huge amount of this sort of variation even within conditions that were the ones that we evolved under.
So expand. Tell us more about that.
So even in the conditions under which we evolved, there were serious changes in daylight. So there was noon light, and there was dusk light, and there was morning light. There were serious differences in contrast, viewing an object against one sort of plant against a different sort of plant. Yeah, it's true that evolution must have equipped us, I take it, to make the sorts of visual discriminations that we make. That's all true. But that doesn't mean that in evolutionarily good conditions or normal conditions, things are sufficiently constrained that there isn't going to be this serious kind of perceptual variation that we were talking about.
But and there is, who cares about perceptual variation? I mean, one thing that evolved is color constancy, right? So it's a very complicated thing on the internal side as well as the external side. There's no similar phenomenon of pain constancy that I know of.
But color variation is like the thing, isn't it, John? That needs to be explained. In his view, can't really. I mean, he said, "Who cares about variation?" I thought that's the big deal. What do you think?
Yeah, that is the big deal for me. I mean, I think it's true there is some constancy, but the challenge to John's kind of position was, given the variation that there is, tell me which one of the variants uniquely reveals the way the world is. And I just don't see that any appeal to the evolutionary environment or the normal conditions is going to be up to the task of choosing between the variants.
Well, I just think if a perceived property has to pass that condition of having a unique human signal that tracks it without problems, a lot of things aren't going to be real. Now, maybe colors are more problematic along that line than some other things, but they're less problematic than others.
Three Ravens from San Francisco's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy, Three Raven.
It's great to be here.
What's your comment or question?
I find myself to be an observer, and so I took notes here. So the needle is doing tissue damage the brain sends a signal that we say is pain that tells us there's tissue damage happening. So the color of this red box here on my table has a molecular makeup. So I say that it's both. They're interwoven. A lot of authoritarian science says, no, it's one thing, not the other. But it's like will and fate. I don't think it's one or the other. I think they're happening at the same time.
Thanks, Reverend. I'm not, Jonathan, you got a response to that? I'm not quite sure what the issue is, but do you have a response?
I'm not quite sure I understood the question, but to some extent it sounded a little like the sort of things that I wanted to say, namely that there are the objective properties in the object, and there are the reactions going on in the subject, and the color is constituted by both, namely by the relation between what's going on in the object and what's going on in the subject. So if that's the idea, then I agree.
You're a very ecumenical guy, and in philosophy, I tend to favor ecumenicalism over non-ecumenicalism. But sometimes it's like cheating to be so ecumenical, right? Can't you just come down on one side or the other? Why be so ecumenical?
Well, why do you think that it's cheating to say that subjects and what's going on in subjects are just as much part of the world as stuff that doesn't involve subjects?
Let me be on Jonathan's side for a minute, because I think the distinction he's making between subject and object, and that experiences, to be useful, they have to have a subjective side so that they get into the brain and make a difference in behavior. But they need to be an objective side, too, so the behavior they make a difference in turns out to be successful or unsuccessful based on the world. So I actually think he's got the makings of a very original view.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about the nature of color with Jonathan Cohen from UC San Diego.
In our final segment, we'll ask whether color science has any hope of explaining the subjective experience of color.
Science and the experience of color, along with questions from our audience when Philosophy Talk continues.
She comes in colors, but what is that really like? I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. Our guest is Jonathan Cohen from UC San Diego, and we're thinking about the metaphysics of color.
Jonathan, we've been mostly focused on whether color is something out there in the world, but we all agree that there's something going on in the mind. And that's also a big question. Some people think that science can't possibly explain why red, whatever exactly is, looks to us just the way it does. What is this redness that goes on in our mind or that our mind produces? Is it, if it's not a physical property of something out there in the world, I mean, is it a physical property of our brain, but our brains aren't red? So what in the world is it? Where do you come down on that issue?
So I think experiences definitely are something in the head. And it's the job of science. In particular, I guess psychophysics is a really useful science here of trying to tell us the relation between what's out there in the world and what's in our head. And I think we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot of unsolved problems in this area. So one thing that we've learned a lot about, for example, in the 19th century and continuing through the 20th century, is about the relationships between color experiences. So why is it that things that are red can't be green? Why is it that things that are blue can't be yellow? Well, that's just starting out with phenomenal observations, but people have done a lot of science to try to figure out what are the mechanisms that explain why those phenomenal facts hold. And there is a great case, I think, where the science has made huge contributions to our understanding of the way things look.
Well, let's go back to something you mentioned at the very opening, the inverted spectrum. That is to say,
Sure.
How do I know that what happens in your mind when you see a red apple is what happens in my mind when I see a red apple? Now, can't science to a certain extent look at what happens in the rods and cones and visual centers of various people and answer that question? And haven't they kind of answered it with well, often what's going on in two different relatively normal minds when they see an apple is different?
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought you were going to ask the question, haven't they answered that what's going on in two relatively normal minds is the same. But actually, there's good evidence, there's good reason to believe that what's going on in two relatively normal minds is quite different. So one way to think about that is the example that I think I already mentioned about whether a monochromatic light might look greenish to one normal observer and without looking bluish, and then to a different observer it will look greenish and bluish. There just are differences in people's rod populations, difference in people's cone populations, difference in the ratio between them. There's all kinds of differences between people. So, of course, it's unsurprising that there's going to be quite a lot of phenomenal differences as a result.
But Jonathan and John, I think you guys are letting science too off the hook. I'm going to speak in the voice of our common friend and colleague, David Chalmers. I mean, there's this what he likes to call the hard problem of consciousness. Look, red looks a certain way to me. And this is how I identify things as red, by the way it looks to me. There's something it's like to seeing red now. I'm seeing now red, yellow, and I can distinguish them by what people call their phenomenological character. Here's what some people think. Do all the neuroscience you want. Do all the physics you want. The thing that's missing in physics and neuroscience, the thing it will never explain about any kind of conscious experience, but let's take color as the prime example, is why red looks just that way rather than some other. It's one thing to explain how I can distinguish red from yellow, from green, from orange, and all that, and science does a really good job of explaining why we perceive so many colors and not fewer and all that, and why we perceive this color as more similar to that color than this. It can do that, but the look of red, the redness of the red, is there any actually even a clue to a scientific explanation of that? I don't think so.
So what kind of explanation are you looking for when you say you want the identity explained? Suppose that I do my neuroscience and I say, here's neural state B for brain, and here's my phenomenal state P for phenomenal. N equals P. B equals P. You say you want an explanation of how that could be true. What kind of an explanation would satisfy you?
Yeah, one that enables me to derive from all the facts of neuroscience and all the qualitative experience, derive in some systematic, rigorous way just why this experience looks just that way and no other. And couldn't possibly be other. Couldn't possibly be an inverted spectrum or anything like that.
I suppose if I were to say that you and Chalmers shouldn't talk about deriving things from facts, you can only derive things from sentences.
That wouldn't help.
That wouldn't help.
No, that's the kind of explanation I think David wants, and I think he's right to want it. And you think that's misguided or something?
I think that's misguided. I don't think we have general derivations of all the truths in the world in other domains either. Just it turns out that some kinds of identities are true but not derivable. And if the kind of explanation that you're insisting on requires that kind of derivation, I think you're going to be an unhappy camper in the long term.
Ben in Berkeley's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Ben.
Hi there. I'd be curious to get your opinion on what the color is of microwaves, and maybe as a follow-up to that, if you can't answer it, because I imagine it's an unanswerable question, what is it metaphysically that's different between visible light and all the other kinds of light?
Right. That's a really good question, Ben, and I was puzzled by some of this same stuff, Jonathan, reading that there are animals that see colors up in the ultraviolet and the infrared range. I mean, how do we know that? I mean, what does that even mean to say that they see colors? But you can answer my question and Ben's question because they're related.
So I don't think microwaves look anyway to at least human observers, and if they don't look anyway to human observers, then it's hard to say that we're having a visual experience as a result of them. So I would say that they're not colored relative to human observers. But you're right, there could be other kinds of observers such that it looks some way for them, such that microwaves do look some way for them. And then I guess I would say that microwaves might have a color with respect to them. How do you tell? Well, you do normal kind of discrimination tests. You see whether, let's say bees or whatever, because bees can discriminate some kind of ultraviolet stuff.
Right.
So you just ask bees to discriminate things that are different only in ultraviolet respects, and you put the nectar under one petri dish and not under another, and you see whether they can find the one.
How do I know? Okay, so for us, having a color, being a color is having a visual experience of one of these sorts, where I can kind of point out, now I'm seeing red, now I'm seeing orange. I mean, bees can discriminate, apparently, and do discriminations up in the ultraviolet range. How do we know that they're actually having color experiences? If they're not having color experiences with phenomenal character, with qualitative character, then how do we get off saying they have color experience? Isn't that begging some question or something?
Sure. I was assuming that visual systems create visual phenomenology, and I think we have good reasons to think that we know what visual systems are, what part of bees are their visual systems. You could disagree with that, but then I challenge you to come up with some other way of distinguishing visual phenomenology.
I
from
agree that
other
they
kinds.
have visual systems. I'm not sure that they're conscious. I think phenomenology is a feature of conscious minds. So I'm not sure that bees have conscious experiences. They do have visual systems that respond to light and all that sort of stuff. But since I think the color is locked up in the brain of the mind of the conscious creature, and I'm not sure bees have consciousness, I'm not sure.
What do you think? Do you think it's something? It's like something to be a bee?
I have no idea.
See, I wouldn't say that. Well, anyway.
Do you think I'm just being Mysterian here?
I guess I'm not sure whether you're being Mysterian.
You're being mysterious.
Do you think it looks any way to a bee to respond to ultraviolet frequencies?
I don't know. I don't know how I would answer that. But unless it looks a certain way to a bee, then it's not having color experiences, even though its system is doing
I agree with that.
Discrimination.
I would say I doubt that the bee is conscious in the sense of being aware of its own experiences as something that it can actually think about and consider and plan about. But I think it's something to be a bee. I mean, at least till someone proves me otherwise. I'm sure it's like something to be a fish.
This is another good question for John's initial position, though. If you just think that they're objective properties and that's what colors are, then why aren't these objective properties colors, assuming they're not?
Well, I don't know that I ever use the word just. I try never to say anything is just something. But look, we've got some interesting email from Lucy in San Francisco. So maybe this isn't the hard problem of consciousness, but it's one of the difficult problems of consciousness, let's say. With pain, Lucy says, we experience it in our bodies, but with color perception, we don't. Does your guest have an explanation for why we experience color? That is, we think of it as splashed out all over the objects, even if that's false, but we don't think of pain that way. So what's the basis of the difference, given that, on your view, they're quite a bit alike?
We do actually think of pain as being splashed out. It's just splashed out over a narrower range, I take it. So we can have a pain in our foot, but if it's a neural state that we thought we wanted to identify with the pain experience, my neural states aren't in my feet, I guess. So I really am sort of spreading and gilding the pain out onto some part. It's just a more local part of the world.
Yeah, but Descartes said that was one of the problems with pain. We mistakenly locate the pain in the body rather than in the mind. We think it's like in the foot, but it's not in the foot. That's one of the problems with qualia for him. They're obscure and confused perceptions of things. What do you think about that Cartesian thought?
I think he was right.
I think he was wrong. So I think that we do gild and stain both. And, it's a consequence of his view that colors, if he went consistently about colors, he would have to say colors are in the mind. That seems
he would.
Pretty darn revisionary view, right?
He would have to say that. You don't think there's... I was trying to figure out what common sense, just not philosophical wisdom, but common sense has to think about that. Are there any explorations of our sort of common sense conception of color, and whether like the realism or the fictionalism or some view like yours is what common sense believes?
I can only tell you this. When I ask undergraduates, for that matter, when I ask color scientists, I just get a whole spread of opinion. I don't really think there is any one consistent common sense. People really take the whole full spread of philosophical views seriously.
I think that's right. So that suggests that Descartes, Galileo, the primary, secondary quality distinction, I mean, there is something to it.
There's something to all of it.
I actually think your view with the strong distinction between, not the strong distinction, but with the idea that, look, when we attribute anything to anything, we're saying things about the subjects and about the objects. And if you try to push it all into one or the other, you're probably missing something.
So, Jonathan, on that note of praise, I'm going to thank you for this really colorful conversation. It's been great fun.
Thank you, guys. It really has been fun.
Our guest has been Jonathan Cohen. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of California, San Diego. He's author of The Red and the Real, an essay on color ontology. So, John, what colorful thoughts are you having now? But don't give me colorful language for that.
Well, Ken, what's a chicken crossing the road?
I don't know.
Poultry in motion. Now, who says that's not an objectively funny thing? I mean, that's absurd. It's at least as sure that someone will laugh at that as that they'll see red when they look at an apple. So that's my closing thought.
That's your closing thought. I'm going to have to process that one. My closing thought is, yeah, there's something out there, but I'm not sure if colors are out there. Something out there causes our color experience, but who knows where the color is. But you know what? This conversation continues at Philosopher's Corner at our online community of thinkers, where our motto is, get this, cogito ergo blogo, I think, therefore I blog. And you can become a partner in that community of thinkers by visiting our website, philosophytalk.org.
Now a guy who talks a real blue streak, or is it mauve, or purple, or puce? At any rate, it's Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes. Thinking about color, I remember The Wonderful World of Color, Disney's Sunday night TV show when I was a kid. It seemed to imply that Disney was adding something to the world that it previously lacked. Strangely, among artsy types, black and white movies are considered more realistic than color movies. And I suppose the latest 3D Technicolor extravaganza would be considered less real than the sepia-tone character drama that wowed the crowd at Sundance. We like color, but we don't trust it. Some of us can't tell flat white from egg white, even while standing in the hardware store with the swatch in our hand. And the world of color can be ambiguous, enormous, and intimidating. Looking for something that might shed light on color symbolism, I read that the color red, quote, symbolizes insight, intense hunger, and also a need for medical assistance, unquote. Well, how do you know which shade is which? Even beyond simple colors, color is confusing. At Sherman-Williams, you will find a vast array of color choices, first under the large categories, with names like Softer Side, Coastal Cool, Color Pizzazz, Global Spice, and Livable Luxe. Then on down to the subsets of Cavern Clay, Sealskin, Frolic, and Mindful Gray. I guess that's the color you paint your yoga studio. Remember DuPont? Their motto used to be better living through chemistry. Today they make film, display screens, bulletproof vests, Teflon, room design tools, and paints. Go to the website. You can use a thing called the DuPont Spectromaster Color Atlas to find the world of color there's right for you. You have to sign up for it, though. Color selection is a lot of work. And then there's Pantone. According to its website, Pantone is the world-renowned authority in color and provider of color systems. Apparently, it has all the colors now. What happened was the founder of Pantone, Lawrence Herbert, back in 1963, concluded that the spectrum is interpreted differently by each viewing individual. So he created the Pantone Matching System, a book of standardized color in a fan format. Now Pantone is known worldwide as the, quote, standard language for accurate color communication, unquote. Furthermore, Pantone has asserted that their lists of colors are the intellectual property of Pantone. Free use of the list is not allowed, supposedly. Last year, British chocolate maker Cadbury lost a 5-year lawsuit to register its own purple packaging color. Rival Nestle introduced testimony that another chocolate maker had used that same shade of purple since World War I, which is Pantone 2685C, for those of you who paid for the Pantone Spectrum fans. So maybe in the future we won't have to pay Pantone $1 every time we even look at a candy bar. Once a year, though, Pantone hosts a secret meeting in which a color is chosen for the following year. 2013 was emerald. 2014, it is radiant orchid. Looks like plain old violet to me, but thank you, Pantone, I guess. Why is the color of the year selection meeting secret, though? What is Pantone trying to hide? In the future, I say that the color of the year meetings should be transparent. Now, wait, that would give the color of the year away, wouldn't it? I'll make that meeting mindful gray with just a hint of translucence. I gotta go.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2014.
Our executive producer is David Demarest.
The program is produced by Devin Strolovich. Laura McGuire is our director of research. Dave Millar is our director of marketing.
Thanks also to Chris Hoff, Merle Kessler, Carola Kreitmeyer, Jimmy Tobin, Jill Covington, and Mark Stone.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from various groups at Stanford University and the partners at our online community of thinkers.
And from the members of KALW San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
Not even when they're true and reasonable. The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org, where you too can become a partner in our community of thinkers.
I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
Oh, and thanks for thinking too.
Red? They have to paint me red before they chop me. It's a different religion from ours, I think.